Depression is real. 300 years before the birth of Christ, a Greek doctor named Hippocrates noticed sadness. But it was a sadness different from that caused by a life event, different from anyone's natural disposition. It was a sadness longer, more intense than any event merited, a sadness seemingly without cause. And so, he tried to find that cause. Back then, health was thought to be determined by 4 fluids in the body, the 4 humors. Phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, blood. When the fluids were balanced, a human found health. When they were out of balance, humans fell ill. According to Hippocrates, an excess of black bile caused this sadness. Melon from the Greek for black, kali for bile, hence melancholia. When I was 16, I encountered this melancholia firsthand. My home life was falling apart. 5 people in my family died that year, some from age, some from alcohol. I was taking on too much responsibility at once. I was starting to think about college. I was drowning under pressure. But I was also going to Europe. Amid the circumstances, my parents managed to support me on a class trip to Europe. And in those moments, 2 weeks across France, Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, there was wonder. But there was also pain. Relentless bullying from someone I considered my best friend. In that trip, I watched our relationship rupture. When we returned, everything came back at once. The loss, the pressure, and now the dissolution of my closest friendship. A crippling sense of being overwhelmed engulfed me. Suddenly, I couldn't stay awake, hypersomnia. Suddenly, I couldn't stop gorging myself, binge eating disorder. Suddenly, I became constantly angry and constantly sad. Suddenly, my remaining relationships fell apart. Suddenly, I was depressed. The theory of the 4 humors didn't last. Hippocrates' theory of the 4 humors mixed with Pythagoras' of the 4 elements, water, earth, fire, and air, creating an alternate explanation of the causes of melancholia. The theory of excess black bile still contributed to the theory of depression, but in parallel, the theory of excess yellow bile became the theorized cause of mania, of heightened anxiety and energy, excitability. Over the next few centuries, doctors' focus changed from causes to categories. In the 18th century, depression separated into 3 different diagnoses: partial madness, total madness, and amentia. Partial madness meaning only one part of your thought process, like sadness, was affected. Total madness, where every thought faculty in the brain was impacted, and amentia, a complete incoherence and breakdown of ideas. For the next 100 years, the definition of melancholia morphed between endless numbers of categories and subcategories. True melancholia, false melancholia, furious melancholia, imagination that one's body is in a dangerous condition, weariness of life, deception concerning the nature of one's species. Hundreds more. In the 19th century, the term depression was proposed, intended to describe the inhibition of a particular faculty of the mind, intellect, emotion, or volition. By the end of the 19th century, the categorization, subcategorization, recategorization whirlwind that was the field of depression diagnosis finally calmed, with a scientist named Emil Kraepelin, who introduced the unitary concept of melancholia, something he coined manic depressive psychosis. Since then, the categorization has fluctuated slightly, adding in branches of causes and severity. Today, 2 main sources for the official definition of depression persist. The 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, released by the American Psychological Association, and the International Classification of Diseases by the World Health Organization. Both of these sources hold one unitary definition of depression, with many specifiers to deeply describe each case. If we focus only on the DSM, this, at a high level, is what it means to have depression. A depressed mood for an extended amount of time, loss of interest in activities, significant weight change, slowing down of thoughts and movement, fatigue, feelings of worthlessness and guilt, inability to concentrate or make decisions, and recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. According to nearly all of these symptoms, I am depressed, and I've had depression for the last 10 years. Depression can't be cured with willpower, with travel, with dreams. But doing things that I enjoy makes the days a little easier and gives me hope that even if I never get better, at least I will have spent my life doing things that were meaningful, things that were worthwhile, and convince myself that my life wasn't wasted. Traveling to Europe for the first time was one of those things. If you've watched this far, there are two things I want you to remember. First, throughout history and even today, there are dozens of definitions and symptoms and names that can mean depression or that can mean mental illness. Just because you don't quite fit into one or don't fit into one today doesn't mean that what you're feeling isn't real. Your feelings are valid. Second, since as far back as ancient Greece and maybe even before then, depression has been recognized as something more than a personality type, something more than a temporary sadness. People have observed for literal centuries that depression exists, even if they didn't fully understand it. What that means, what you need to remember, is that mental illness is real. Depression is real.